Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's try it again. This is audience participation in this part. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. Welcome to the May 6, 2019 meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Montgomery is absent. Commissioner Roth is absent. Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Here.
Commissioner Beanhoff?
Here.
Commissioner Busby is here. Commissioner Wise?
Here.
Commissioner Braley?
Here.
Commissioner Les Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Mudgett?
Here.
Commissioner John Smith?
Here.
Thank you. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consent items agenda are listed under the consent items agenda unless there is a motion to unless there is a request to remove the item from the consent agenda, the item will be approved in one motion. Is there a request to remove the item from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Commissioner Braley?
Yes, I'd like to approve the consent agenda items, including staff's recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Wise?
I'll second the motion.
Motion is second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. New business. Special use permit 02-19-05, Kirk Daycare, request for special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare with up to 10 children as a home occupation. Mark?
Good evening, Mark Zilsdorf, City Planning Staff. The applicant requests special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare for up to 10 children. Per Chapter 17.51 of the zoning ordinance, a daycare home is permitted use, but is limited to 6 children. A special use permit is required for group daycare homes, and a maximum number of children allowed is 12. The applicant has operated a legal daycare home with up to 6 children at this location during the past year, and her current state license allows her to care for up to 10 children. The property is zoned R1, and surrounding properties to the northeast and south are also zoned R1 and developed with single-family homes. The property to the west and southwest are zoned PD planned development and are also developed with a duplex residential homes. The daycare will have no more than 10 children, including the provider's own, at any time during business hours. The hours of operation will be from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. The property is served by a 2-car driveway that has approximately 50 feet in depth and provides adequate room for off-street drop-off and pickup of the children. In accordance with the city's requirement, the applicant also has a fenced-in play area in the backyard. The backyard is enclosed with a 5-foot-tall wood fence. The applicant has a current license issued by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment that allows for the care of up to 10 children. The fire department completed an on-site inspection of the residence in March of 2019 as required. Site inspection indicated all life safety requirements were satisfied. The owner also has a current business license from the city clerk for operation of her existing daycare. As far as staff's recommendation, granting the special use permit should have little, if any, detrimental effect on the surrounding properties. There are numerous special use permits that have been issued for the provision of child care as a home occupation without concerns being raised, and this owner has operated daycare at this residence for the last year with no issues or complaints. Staff recommends approval of SUP-02-19-05, special use permit for Beth Kirk's Daycare for the operation of a group daycare for up to 10 children as a home occupation located at 10708 West 65th Street, subject to the following 5 conditions. 1, review of the special use permit in 1 year. 2, the applicant shall comply with all requirements of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and maintain an annually renewed daycare license from the state. Copy of the license shall be provided to the Community Development Department after it is renewed by KDHE. Number 3, the applicant shall have no more than 10 children at the home, including the provider's own, between the hours of 7:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. Number 4, the applicant shall obtain an annual business license from the city clerk every year the daycare remains in operation. And number 5, no signage either on-site or off-site will be allowed. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Mark. Is the applicant present? If you come forward and state your name and address, please.
Elizabeth Kirk, 10708 West 65th Street.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Peterson?
This is for staff, but first of all, good luck with your endeavor. One of the questions I have on one of the 5 recommendations, it says no signage either on-site or off-site is allowed, and I just need clarification. If she were to advertise at a local church or anything like that, is that considered signage of any kind?
That's a good question. Let me clarify that. By that, we mean there should be no signage on the property, in the yard, or in the window advertising the daycare operation, nor any signage on the street corners or in public right-of-way areas advertising availability for daycare. Any other advertising mechanisms through magazines, newspaper print, in coffee shops, grocery store bulletin boards, those kind of things are perfectly fine.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff? If not, as this is a, we open a public hearing for this. Does anybody wish to speak on this matter? Seeing no one get up, then I would say the public hearing is over with. We're in commission discussion now. Commissioner Beanoff.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Seeing that there's not been any reports of any challenges in the site, and knowing that daycare is certainly close to my heart as far as good service to the community, I have no issues with this proposal.
Any further discussion?
Also make a motion.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd propose a motion to approve SUP, where'd it go? SUP 02-19-05, Kirk Daycare request special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare with up to 10 children as a home occupation, as submitted by staff and subject to the conditions of approval.
Is there a second? Commissioner Mudgett.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to approve SUP 02-19-05 Kirk Daycare request for special use permit for operation of a group daycare up to 10 children as a home occupation. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Next, SP 11-1905, PrePlat-06-19-05 and Z-03-19-05 Schier, I hope I've got that right, Products proposes construct a new industrial office development in multiple phases at the northwest corner of Shawnee Mission Parkway and Woodland. Staff has a presentation on this. Thank you, Stephanie.
The ag to RS, a portion of the ag to PI, and then retain the existing PI parcel area as PI zoning. It's 1.2 million square feet of land, which is about 29 acres or so. And they're proposing a phased development, with the first phase being about 63,000 square feet of building. Really quickly, just to set the stage here, these are the open items that you'll see throughout the report tonight. The site plan, we need to look into finalizing the landscape plan with the applicant. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit here. Also the elevations, they're preliminary at this stage, and staff will be working with the applicant to finalize the elevations for the project. And there's also an open item for traffic impact study in the report. and the applicant may be required to provide further traffic study and potentially provide corresponding improvements to Woodland Drive and/or Shawnee Mission Parkway for future phases of the development. So again, tonight we're purely just talking about phase 1, which is 63,000 square feet. The future land use map shows a variety of different land uses. Again, you can see on this graphic a little bit here, you can see the existing parcels outlined in a red dashed line. The majority of the parcels are called commercial on the future land use map. There's a portion of it that's low density residential toward the northwest corner of the parcels, and a very small area for parks and open space because we do have a stream coming through at that corner of the property. To the east is warehouse and industrial, where we have some existing warehouse and industrial type uses. To the east, we have office and service in pink, and then more low density residential in yellow on this graphic. The surrounding zoning, which is different than that future land use map, pretty much is in line with the future land use map in our comprehensive plan, except for the parcel is currently zoned PI, the southern portion of the property is zoned PI, and the upper portion is zoned AG. So there's a few different zonings going on here, but you can see there's some RS to the west of the property, which is what the petitioner is proposing for a 3-acre portion of this project. Here's a comparison of the existing zoning on the left of the screen and the proposed rezoning on the right of the screen. So you can see the majority of the parcel is proposed to be PI, and a small portion that's about 3 acres would be zoned RS, which is a residential zoning district. The proposed phase 1 site plan is a small portion of the site. You can see here in comparison to this next graphic on the screen that shows a potential full build out of the site. So again, tonight we are only talking about a site plan approval for just phase 1 with 63,000 square feet of building. A portion of that is office, and a portion of that is warehouse and industrial, and manufacturing, and I'll let the applicant talk more about exactly what they do inside the building. But for our purposes, we just talk about what the building is and how it looks and where is it going to be on the site. So to zoom in and reorient you here, north is at the top of the screen in this image. So this gets you an idea of that curve of Woodland Road at the left side of the screen here. And you can see the driveway coming off of Woodland, wrapping around the north side of the building. You have parking to the north and the west of the building, and the loading docks are on the east side of the building facing the railroad tracks. For fire safety, they did provide a road to the south of the building so that the fire trucks can access all sides of the building. And also, if for some reason they do need to use that for turnaround for other vehicles, they have it there for access purposes. Parking-wise, they meet the requirements, and they're actually going to be land banking, or I believe the word was deferring some parking for later in case they maybe don't need it at the very beginning of the build out. That way we actually retain more green space on the site if we realize we might not need all that parking. And we kind of wish most people would do that because we end up with a lot of seas of parking around here. So in this graphic of the full build out plan, you can see that they have thought of exactly how the site would work in the future. This is a conceptual layout of how it might be. Depending on timelines for the future, this may be tweaked, but this is showing how they might be able to lay out the site in the future. You can see they're adding a substantial addition potentially onto the south side of the building. Just to let you know, for this graphic, north is on the left side of the screen, so the top side of the screen is actually facing east, just to make sure you're oriented here. And there is an office building separate to this that is actually north or off to the left of this screen. And you can see also in these plans, there's not anything particular planned for the piece of property that's 3 acres that they propose to zone RS. At this time, there's no plans for that parcel specifically, but it would be reserved to our residential type use because of that proposed zoning. The landscape plan is preliminary at this stage. And staff wanted to note that we're going to be working with the applicant to make sure we discuss the phasing of what landscaping goes with phase 1 versus what kind of landscaping goes with phase 2. As you can see here, this is an overall plan, so we'll be working with the applicant to make sure that we have an understanding of what will be phased, when it will be phased. And the applicant is actually making a great effort to retain some of the existing landscaping on the site as well. So that'll be a major plus for the development, just because we'll already have some mature landscaping on site that they won't need to touch. Elevations, as you saw in the plan set and also in the staff report, there's some renderings in there. This is a conceptual rendering of the elevations. At this time, staff just has a couple open items with the applicant that we're going to be working on with the elevations to make sure we've got rooftop screening, since that isn't shown here, to make sure we've got the correct colors and materials all outlined. But for the most part, the applicant's done a great job of making this mostly industrial building look a little bit more approachable with some nice windows that they've added, this corner element for the office side of the building. And it's actually going to be set back from the road enough with a nice natural landscape buffer and some grade changes, so that there's not going to be a big impact of a large box-like structure sitting right at Woodland or Shawnee Mission Parkway. While I have this image up here, I just want to go through a couple sections of the report really quickly for you. The traffic impact study section of the report, we did talk about how the applicant submitted a traffic study, which was analyzed by our transportation manager. And he found that at this time for phase 1, there's no necessary improvements needed to handle the traffic for phase 1. They've set that access drive back far enough from Shawnee Mission Parkway that there won't be any stacking issues at the intersection of Shawnee Mission Parkway and Woodland. They've added some turn lanes to help also with the movements in and out of the site. And it's wide enough to accommodate everything from your passenger car to the loading trucks that they'll be having going in and out of the site with their products. We did want to make sure in that open item I mentioned at the beginning that the applicant is aware that we may require further traffic study and traffic related improvements at a later date based on the subsequent phases of the project. So I wanted to add that in there as something for the Planning Commission and the audience to be aware of. The engineers also looked over the plans and found basically that the preliminary engineering was on point with where they needed to be. There's no major open items at this point for engineering. And Mark, would you like to talk about that at all? Yeah.
The plat basically is just the preliminary plat is just a 2-lot plat, one lot for the large industrial piece, and then the 3-acre piece for the residential zoning. So it has the appropriate setbacks for each zoning district along the street frontages. Obviously, with the final plat, we'll be looking for the appropriate drainage easements, stormwater management easements, and the like. So, but the staff is comfortable with the preliminary plat as it's shown.
So overall with the project, staff has worked very diligently with the applicant, and the applicant's been very good at working with us with all of our comments. And this plan has gotten to a point where I think they've addressed all the issues we've talked about thus far. They've worked with us on making sure those loading docks are toward the rear of the building rather than out toward Woodland to mitigate the impacts of that more industrial nature of the building. And at this point, staff recommends approval of the rezoning, site plan approval, and preliminary plat. And at this time, if you'd like for me to read through the recommendations in full along with the conditions, I can do that for you. Okay, so staff recommends approval of Z-03-19-05, rezoning from Ag and PI to RS and PI, located in the 6200 to 6500 blocks of Woodland Drive, subject to the following conditions. Rezoning shall be contingent upon approval of site plan SP 111905 and preliminary plat PrePlat-06-19-05, and Phase 1 of the subject site shall be developed in a manner that is substantially in accordance with the plans as noted on the list of reviewed plans, which is included in the staff report. Staff recommends approval of SP 111905, site plan approval for Phase 1 and preliminary site plan approval for Phase 2, located in the 6200 to 6500 blocks of Woodland Drive, subject to the following conditions. Site plan approval shall be contingent upon approval of rezoning Z-03-19-05 and preliminary plat 06-19-05. The site plan for Phase 1 shall be substantially in accordance with the corresponding plans as noted in the list of reviewed plans within the staff report. Only the conceptual site plan for Phase 2 shall be considered approved, and the applicant shall resubmit for a final site plan for Phase 2 at a later date. The applicant must work with staff to finalize the landscape plan. The applicant must work with staff to finalize the building elevations, and the applicant may be required to provide further traffic study and potentially provide corresponding improvements to Woodland Drive and/or Shawnee Mission Parkway for future phases of the development. Lastly, staff recommends approval of PrePlat-06-19-05, preliminary plat for Schier Products, an industrial and residential subdivision, located in the 6200 to 6500 blocks of Woodland Drive, subject to the following conditions. Approval of rezoning Z-03-19-05, rezoning from PI, plain industrial, and ag, agricultural, to PI and RS, residential suburban, and site plan SP 111905. Acceptance of the dedications on the final plat by the Shawnee governing body and recording of the final plat with the Johnson County Register of Deeds shall be completed prior to issuance of any building permits. Lot 1 within the subdivision shall be subject to all bulk and use requirements of the PI, Planned Industrial Zoning District, while Lot 2 shall be subject to all bulk and use requirements of the RS, Residential Suburban Zoning District. All street, storm, and street-like public improvements are required to be constructed in accordance with the proposed site plan SP 111905 for this development. Access control shall be provided as shown on the plat with no access to Shawnee Mission Parkway. All utilities shall be placed underground. When an easement is needed specifically for either sanitary or stormwater sewer, the easement must specify the intended use. The provisions of the excise tax shall be satisfied prior to obtaining the mayor's signature on the signature copy of the final plat. Open space fees at the current open space fee rate in effect at the time a building permit is applied for shall be paid prior to the issuance of a building permit. And lastly, the applicant is responsible for obtaining all such permits as may be required by federal, state, and local agencies, including but not limited to the City of Shawnee, the Johnson County Environmental Department, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Kansas Division of Water Resources, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That concludes staff's presentation, and the applicant is here tonight to expand upon that and answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Stephanie. Is the applicant present? If you come forward and state your name and address, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. John Peterson, Poston LAPC, having the pleasure this evening of appearing as the applicant on behalf of Schier Products. I need all the help I can get. Thank you.
Are you in agreement with staff recommendations?
I am, with just a couple of comments of clarification and context. And when you're a lawyer standing up on behalf of a client, people want the least words possible out of his mouth, and I understand that. And what helps is an excellent, thorough, and detailed staff report, which covered really very adequately the product. Before I get to that, David Stein, COO with Schier Products, is here with us. Harold Phelps, Dan Finn, Nathan Latke with Phelps Engineering. They've been part of the design team in terms of civil engineering and our traffic analysis. And Craig Rogge with GBA Architects has served as, so they're here for any questions that might come up this evening. I'm not going to walk you through the master plan. We're very pleased after a lot of work with our design team, working with your staff, working through all the issues and It's not always the case when an applicant comes in to be able to say, we have full support of your professional staff, and we're pleased we do, and I think it was good effort on both sides to get us there. Maybe you saw we're consistent with the master plan. You understand we've got very similar zoning next to the areas that we want to rezone. We've factored in some residential as we move on the site to the west along Woodland Drive and interface with existing residential. So on balance, both because Schier wanted to do it this way, they wanted to fit in well in the community, the land, the amount of land available enabled us to do that. Just a couple of issues I want to touch on briefly, and maybe it might be helpful to just understand a little bit about Schier Products, and I'll take a stab at it, be brief, and let you know what they're about. It's an exciting opportunity for Schier. We hope that it's perceived to be an exciting opportunity for the city of Shawnee. This will be a relocation of their corporate headquarters and their operational facilities to Shawnee. They really are a state-of-the-art company that is having a tremendous amount of penetration, not only locally, but nationally and really internationally. What do? They produce, and we are talking about industrial and manufacturing, but really is a assemblage operation and a fabrication to some extent. They create grease interceptors. And good news is, for the record, they do not produce grease on the site. Their job is to take grease and help our restaurants, whether they're here in Kansas City or the Kansas City metropolitan area, across the country. What do you do with grease when you're putting it in the sanitary sewer system? It's a problem for all of us. They have a state-of-the-art proprietary function that more efficiently removes grease and is able to capture it from the wastewater, thus making the cost of the wastewater system and the treatment of our water much more efficient. And then it can be disposed of properly. It's more efficient, it's more environmental friendly, and being more efficient in terms of how it operates, it's less costly to our business operators that need that kind of facility in the community. So great company. It's, I think, an opportunity. You'll see a company that right now will come to the site with about 50 employees and with the hope of growing that base. As we get to some of the issues, it's interesting. It's a 60-some thousand square foot building. If we get to phase 2, it will be probably 160, 170,000. That doesn't really equate to the number of employees. So in terms of square footage and employees, it's less employees than the square footage would suggest, which is a good thing in terms of the efficiency of the operation, but also just impacts to those in surrounding properties, traffic probably being one of the big ones. Let's jump. We have reviewed all the stipulations and including the open issues, the open items that staff has articulated, and we're in agreement with all of them. That's the bottom line answer. I do want to address the open items, open planning items very quickly. There are 2 shalls and there's 1 may. And it's important as we move forward because this is a multi-fronted initiative to become a corporate headquarters in the city of Shawnee. This is the land use, the zoning, making sure we adhere to all your zoning guidelines, your development guidelines, compliant with the master plan, all of those things that are important to this body and the city council. We're also on the finance side with the city at the same time, trying to bring these 2 together. So what we agree to here, we will agree to what staff is requiring, but we want to make sure there's a clear understanding of what the basis is of that agreement. First one on the screen, the applicant must work with staff to finalize the landscape plan. Absolutely. I think staff did a job of maybe bringing that down to a context. We're good with our plan. We're good with the number of our trees and shrubs. We're good with our species. We just got to work out the details. How much of that are we going to implement with phase 1? How much will we implement with phase 2? The applicant must work with staff to finalize the building elevations. Craig's done a lot of work with the professional staff, and thank you for the compliment to Craig, really, and the company willing to spend the money to make this not just look like a assembly product, but really bring almost an office, Class A office kind of facade to it as it interfaces with the public. But the issues we're going to drill down on and continue to talk to staff primarily are colorization. We know what the building materials are, but as you know, brick can be different shades of color, so we're going to work through those details. And a very important one, which is the screening of the rooftop mechanical units. We know what the city ordinances are, and it's called screening because it's supposed to screen. And so we'll be bringing those details in, and that's a must, and we will do that before we expect to receive a building permit. The last one goes to the May, and and there may be some concern in the audience or the public. This one deals with traffic, and I just want to set the context very quickly. We took a very, very conservative snapshot and analysis in terms of traffic impact. And there's two ways to do it. You all have heard many, many applications as you've been on the Planning Commission. What you do is typically you take your square footage, you go to the ITE manual, it says this is a use, you do a little calculation, it says this is how many trips are going to be generated by the site. Back to my point, lots of square footage here, not so many employees. So if you take the ITE manual approach, you are probably putting a safety net, double safety net, triple safety net in terms of what the actual impact will be on the streets for Schier's use. But we thought, let's take it to the extreme. Let's do a worst case scenario, and let's not just do a worst case scenario for phase one. Let's do a worst case scenario if we build the whole thing out as our final plan reflects, our preliminary plan reflects, as the company is successful, which is the hope, and continues to add value to the city. If you take that worst case scenario, the most stringent approach under that ITE manual, and you lay it across the entire project, what it shows is we have plenty of street capacity on Woodland. We have plenty of separation in terms of our drive accesses to Woodland. And then where the focus really drives down to is Shawnee Mission Parkway and Woodland. And we know we've got, at times, AM and PM peaks, we're bumping up against acceptable levels of service there. I will tell you as I saw in this worst case scenario, AM peak is operating at an E, and we add, I think, about 2 seconds of delay if we, under that very stringent analysis, and then for the PM peak, I think we're maybe less than a second. So that's your worst case scenario. Obviously now all we're doing is about a third of that. I bring all that up to say the applicant may be required to provide further traffic study and potentially provide corresponding improvements for future phases. And if you go to that part in the staff report, it actually says, if phase one traffic volumes differ from projections and phase two volumes have to be reviewed. So we know we're going to be way below that. But if we blow what we thought and blow our study in phase one, then we understand. Then we're going to have to reevaluate all the traffic and move forward. So with that context, we agree to the stipulations. We agree to the articulation of the open planning items by staff, and we would welcome your support. I want to bring one other thing up before I close. I think there may be some of the audience a little concerned that we are planning, platting, and zoning their property. If I could go back and catch it here. If you notice, it's a little hard to see. I think you can see it best on that. If you see where PI, which is the current zoning, you go up in that ag area, and to the left of Woodland, to the west side of Woodland, just as you are in the green, you'll see there's a track there and a little arc that crosses Woodland to the east. That is not our property. That is owned. It must have been a remnant left after right-of-way was taken for Woodland. It's owned by a third party. We are not platting. We are not zoning. We are not planning that property. Our lines for each one of those entitlements circumvents that little piece of land there. So I just wanted anybody that might be concerned about that to state that for the record. With that, Mr. Chairman, I or any members of our development team would be happy to answer any question.
Thank you. Does the committee have any, does the commission have any questions for staff or applicant? Commissioner Bienhoff.
Yes, I'm curious, the property to the north, I believe, is a dog exercise or a pet exercise facility. That's not in your property, correct?
No, sir.
I'm curious if you had any discussions with that property owner, and if you could elaborate on that.
I don't think we have had any discussions. We are actually, I know part of that the ground at the top there, it actually was master plan for open space, and you can see if I can get to our site plan there. You can see to the north there, we're leaving that area open, and other than eventually, we're going to put an office building down there, but a big part of that area up there will remain green space. So I don't know exactly, Commissioner, where that interfaces with the dog park. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Thank you.
We all love dogs.
Any other questions for staff or applicant? I have a couple questions, and the first one is for staff. On the guideline here, when we're looking at Clear Creek goes down through there, and part of this is marked as 100 foot from must be the center of the creek, and part of it is marked 120 feet. Is that a concern at all?
Well, at this time,
When
we're
we
not
get to the east part of the
contemplating-
property, then it's 120 feet.
Oh, along the railroad?
When it gets close to the railroad, but it's still well within the property.
I know that.
Because there's a retaining wall that sets at 100 feet from center line of the creek. And then later on, as you go further east, then it goes to 120 feet. I presume, sir, please, if you could come forward and state your name and address, and please answer the question.
Yes, Dan Finn with Phelps Engineering, 1270 North Winchester, Olathe, Kansas. So the difference is there's two tribs that come onto their site. One is Clear Creek, and that has a drainage area that does require a floodplain setup, a flood buffer of 120 feet. There's also a separate trib that flows into Clear Creek, and that drainage area only requires a 100-foot stream buffer. So those are delineated separately, but where they merge, it transitions from the 100-foot for the tributary to 120-foot. And so we're staying out of both of those buffer zones.
Thank you. Also, do you have a time frame on your phases now? Because phase one is the single building. Do you have any kind of a time frame on what you're thinking on phase two?
If we can all establish this new corporate headquarters in Shawnee and sell grease interceptors, I mean, it really will be driven by the market and the need for the capacity. We hope it's sooner than later, but it really is driven by product demand.
So at present, you don't have an idea whether 2 or 3 years from now is what the hope is for moving to phase two?
You know, that sounds like a reasonable time frame, but it is going to be based on market demand.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I'm asking that is because it's still going to play back into the amount of landscaping we need. Is if it's 10 years from now, then all I'm asking is a best guess, which might help us determine whether the landscaping, how much of that should be required within the first development.
COO just gave me this, which I don't think was bye-bye to me. He said their business plan is 5 years.
5 years.
And we'll work that in with staff when we're looking at the landscaping.
Very fine, thank you. Any other questions for applicant or staff?
Thank you.
Thank you. Then, at this point in time, we would be in public hearing, and the public hearing is for the zoning only, is that correct? That's for zoning. So if anyone from the public would wish to come forward and speak about this, please, if you come up and state your name, address, and then write your name legibly on the sheet.
Where do you want these? My name's Dr. James R. Swanson. I'm the owner of Swanson Streamway Dog Park and Daycare. I also have residents which will abut this property. So my residence abuts the property, then I have my facility. So the drawing is incorrect. The facility where the dog care is a step beyond to the north. My residential area actually touches their northern edge of the border. And I just have a few questions. One would be, where will the sewage and water originate from? Will it originate from the north and have to cross over and tear up my property? or is it going to come from the south and come from Shawnee Mission Parkway? Second is, and I think you're all very intelligent people. I've served on unified governments in Wyandotte County, and I know how these things work. When somebody spends more time on telling you what they don't think is a problem is going to be a problem, and that's going to be traffic. Especially if you're going to build a rec center down the street. You're going to have children going up and down that sidewalk. You already have a street that's not designed for semi-truck traffic, and it's going to be a disaster at that light right now because it has been ever since the Quick Trip went in. Not that I don't like Quick Trip, not that I don't like this company. I think they have every right to build. I'm not against them building. I'm against the truck, what's going to happen with the truck traffic, and I just hope that that is addressed properly because this is a residential area, and now we're talking about putting semi-trailers, bi-trailers, all types of large pickup or large trucks, and unless we have specificity on the types of trucks and the time of the day that they don't think that's going to impede turning left, or the 5 o'clock traffic that's coming from the east going west is already backed up at 4:30, 4:15, already backed up down the hill, which is blocking off the other business, industrial business area. And now we're going to add to it with semi-trailers turning left. And that's going to increase the length of time of the left-hand turn signal. I'm all for everything for growing Shawnee, no problem. I just think there's a lot better places that we could place something like this that would have better access if we're talking about semi-trailers. If this were a doctor's, dentist, office, eye doctor, that type of thing, I think it would be perfect. But if we're talking about having large trucks on Woodland Drive, if they're going to turn right, they're going to head right past your new facility and go down to Johnson Drive, and they're going to turn right because they're going to want to avoid that left-hand turn onto Woodland. And I don't believe semi-trucks are really even allowed on Woodland Drive. I might be incorrect on that. And then the other question was sewage. Is that going to be coming from the north or from the south? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else from the audience wish to weigh in? Please, if you come forward and state your name, address, and if you legibly write your name down.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Doyle. I'm at 5908 Redbud. Had a couple questions. One, have we thought about the stormwater runoff from all the concrete and stuff, where that's going to go? Two, again, like Dr. Swanson said, I travel this way to and from work, a lot of traffic, and if we're going to use semi-trailers, how's that going to be impacted? Dr. Swanson's right. I mean, today it was like all the way down the hill on Shawnee Mission Parkway just to come back, just to go down Woodland. So very concerned there. On the traffic study, did we think about the community center? Did we add that into the traffic study altogether? Because now you're going to be adding even more, like he said. So very concerned about that. And number three is what type of, I know we said we're putting this together, but is there any emissions or waste generated from this process? No? Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else from the audience wish to participate? Your name and address, and if you'd legibly write that down.
Okay. My name's Vina
Thank you.
Garrison, and I'm the one that owns that little bitty piece of property that you left out in the original drawing. So I talked to Doug Ullman.
If you'd state your name and address,
Vina
please.
Garrison, 6331 Woodland Drive.
Thank you.
And I'm right down the hill where the current turn is, and like my neighbors say, there is a lot of traffic that goes around that corner. And there's a lot of people that walk their dogs up and down the street on Woodland. A lot of people ride their bikes, a lot of strollers. I mean, I see it every morning, every night. So I'm there again concerned because it is that corner the policemen sit right in front of Woodland and catch a lot of people coming around that corner real quick. So I'm not against development. I think it's awesome when you see new development going on in communities. It's always a good sign. But I am very concerned. I am currently agriculture, and I'm still on septic. And when I bought the property 5 years ago, I'm not for sure where the lateral lines go, and I don't know when they put Woodland through, why they left that little bitty piece over on the other side of the road. But I am the owner of that property, and I am concerned about the way that this is all going to happen. And that creek backs up into my yard, and it is considered a floodplain area. So I'm concerned about the development, and when you're changing water, you know, it brings back up, and whether it would be right into my backyard. So that's where I'm concerned. So.
Very fine, thank you. Does anyone else care to speak on this matter? Then at that point in time, we should close the public hearing. But I'm wondering if the gentleman out there can answer a couple questions, which is, where is the sewer line actually, where will it come in from? That's a very pertinent question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, John Peterson, applicant on behalf of Schier Products. Sanitary sewer line comes down our east property line, so we will be tapping into an existing line there to service both our Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects. And we'll be providing an easement for extension of that sewer over to the 3 acres that'll be zoned residential. In terms of the stormwater, obviously our engineers met with your engineers. The premise of that was based on your engineer's evaluation, detention is not required. And although we are doing on-site treatment for water quality purposes as required by your code. And again, all those analytics have been done. As you can see, we're leaving a lot of, even though it's a large building, ultimately, it's also a large piece of ground. And so in terms of the open space, we are way above what would be typically minimum requirements for development. I think ultimately one might always consider, and I'm going to say, hey, it could be worse, but you got industrially zoned property on the southern half of this, and it could be developed much more dense. So this is going to be a relatively lower density kind of development, which also translates to traffic. Again, as I indicated, the employee count for this type of operation is quite a bit less. Trucks, it's not a huge utilizer of cab and trailer type of trucks. We anticipate, based on our experience, because we're in operation over in Kansas City, Kansas today, 5 a day for Phase 1, and probably double that to 10 when we get into the second phase of the operation. Also, a bit anecdotal, but true. Our employees, and it's, I think will have an impact on the situation out there. The operation of this company, both trucks that come and trucks that leave, do it very early in the morning. Our employees come to work inordinately early, and usually by about 3 o'clock, we're done and basically shut down there. So we miss those peak times just by the way, nature of the business and the way we do it.
Thank you. At this point in time, we would be in commission discussion. Commissioner Peterson.
First of all, this is a nice beginning to a hopefully good end for all concerned. I like the fact that staff has still got some danglers out there that we need to dot our I's and cross our T's. I do know that this area is susceptible to water issues, to put it very nicely. I drove past it not too long ago when we were getting that lovely rain where my backyard looked like a swamp. And so I have a tendency to go look around when that happens. So I understand the rooftop and the concrete at this point in time and Phase 2, but I also know that there's a pond there we're going to eventually lose. Appears to be that's where the edge of a building's going to be, and so that's going to need, elevations are going to need to be dealt with that as the plan progresses if we do that. My question is, are we addressing those issues today? Are we holding our breath to say, what if? I know we have talked about it a little bit, but I'd rather be looking at 5 years from now, because there's going to be less land available to do, there's going to be more rooftop, more concrete, and more runoff, and less places for it to go. So are we looking at the big picture, or are we just looking at just a very small portion of it? Because the first very small portion looks fantastic, because we've got lots of options. As the building grows, not so much.
Doug Allman, Community Development staff. We will be looking at this in another phase. We would be doing additional stormwater study for anything that was added on. At this point, they have met our criteria. They've met our design period storms. The fact that you're adjacent to a creek system, you would not necessarily want to detain water. You would want it to get in the system and get away.
Yes.
So I guess the best answer is they are meeting our criteria, and we'll continue to do that with any future building permit other than the phase one.
Now I have another question, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. Is Woodland currently a truck route?
I don't believe so, and I think it's their intention that truck traffic would be southbound to the large arterial highway. So there will not be truck traffic heading up north on Woodland.
Part of the reason why I asked that is I own a business in downtown Shawnee, and it's not a truck route, and periodically we have to have a semi drop something off at our warehouse, and it creates interest. But I can't do a whole lot about existing roads. So my question is just if it's not, and the thing about it is, and he explained some of it in what their anticipated frequency in times as well as. So
I can't speak for the transportation manager, but I will say that he did look at this, and if this were like a FedEx facility or something that was generating multiple truck traffic trips a day, there might have been a different feeling, but literally you're talking 5 trips, 10 trips over a 5-year period of that type. And the employee level compared to if this were to develop commercially with, for instance, a hotel.
Would be completely different.
Or even doctors' offices, those sort of things on 27 acres, the amount of parking employees and customers coming to that site would be probably tenfold to what they're proposing on this 27 acres. So it would be a much larger traffic generator.
Thank you.
One of the interesting things that is sometimes there's a piece of land in Shawnee and you wonder who the hell wants to be between Woodland and a railroad track. And actually this fits it very nicely. And to change agriculture into planned industrial when you still have the buffer of the residential suburban they're putting in, the Clear Creek Parkway, and the Clear Creek Parkway, or the trail there is on the other side of it. They're retaining most of the trees, so I don't even think that would affect the trail over there. I don't think the railroad cares, and across the railroad tracks is industrial areas anyway. It fits what we want. The traffic concern, I think they've addressed it when they're saying they might have 5 to 6 trucks a day, which is minimal. As for how much Woodland handles if the new center goes in, then that's a question that staff and the community will have to answer. But I don't see it as being a big detriment. And you're also talking about employees being there. And I understand your concern, but I think staff has addressed that and said it shouldn't be any more of an issue than is already there, because it handles a lot of traffic. So if any other commissioners have any thoughts or ideas, Commissioner Braley.
Yeah, thank you. It was last Thursday, I think there was something that motivated me to dig in on this project a little bit deeper, and reached out to Doug, which then led me to the chamber, and then having talked to the chamber, they asked if they could share my phone number with the owner, Charlie, and I'll butcher his last name, Ismert. Charlie called me, and I had several questions for him. And one of the things I want to pass on and make people aware of is in that, not necessarily specific to the project, but it is a family-owned business. Charlie was very proud that he and the other owner were Eagle Scouts, and what they appreciated about this piece of land is when they were out looking at industrial, they didn't like flat, uninteresting industrial. They're outdoor enthusiasts. This is a wooded piece of ground that they can put their headquarters in that reflects their personal interests as their employees as well. I did ask specifically, what were some of the other traits that the trail system was something that was appealing to them. And then also he was aware of the potential for a community center. And he specifically mentioned that that would play well into a new wellness program that he's going to implement for his employees. So I see lots of connections to what we like about Shawnee that he also likes about Shawnee, and him wanting to bring his business to Shawnee for those reasons. I mean, these are many things that I was on the branding committee for Shawnee, and we talked about the trees, and we talked about the trails, and these are things that are appealing to them as a business, and I think that speaks to their character. As far as a development, with the controversial project that we have before us in the community center, I'm hearing many comments about we want more restaurants. And, if we want more restaurants, one of the things we need to do is we need to get a bigger daytime population out west. And this is a step towards that, so that our restaurants can be more successful and so that we can attract other restaurants. Also, I always think from a business and what this business can do to impact other businesses in the area when you think about service businesses. We have many automotive centers that do oil changes and car repair and tire service in that area. And if we're bringing more employees that won't be leaving, but maybe they can drop their car off and still get their service. So I see this is one of the kind of developments that can have a greater impact out west. And I was rather excited once I got more information and got to talk to Charlie a little bit more, I felt better about the project and his intent and his commitment to our city. So, thank you.
Commissioner Bienhoff.
So I would echo those comments and also appreciate Schier Products looking at Shawnee and interest in moving your business to our community. I think it's a great fit for the property up there between the road and the railroad tracks. Certainly probably not going to do well for residential. I appreciate the fact that you have residential up in the northwest corner of the property to help buffer that. So thank you. I think you've put a lot of thought into this.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Mudgett.
This is a great looking building. This is probably one of the better manufacturing facilities I've seen lately, and I've worked on some good ones. Great job. Thank you for doing that. I can't tell you how pleased I am that you picked Shawnee for this. Welcome to town.
Commissioner Wise.
Question for staff. So you talk about, and I think generally we know what the materials are, the color palette, the screening and that. Will that just be an update from you when that gets finalized? Is that the intent? So we at least have a chance to evaluate it?
We would leave that to you. If you want to bring it back as a revised elevation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd make me feel better. Just a final look. I agree with Rusty in what everybody else is saying. The elevations generally look good, but a white box, well, it does for the rendering. It gives us a very good idea three-dimensionally what it looks like, the massing. But it'd be nice just to get that final look when all the colors come together, make sure everything's screened. Thank you.
I presume you're in agreement with that then, the bringing the elevation back. And I'm going to ask, I assume you agree with the color palette and the materials list we have for commercial buildings in the city of Shawnee? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We remain in commission discussion, where we occasionally color outside the lines. Commissioner Peterson. Any further discussion? If not, I suggest we do 3 separate motions, starting with the zoning. Is that correct, Doug? Commissioner Wise?
I'll make a motion to approve Z-03-19-05 rezoning from ag and PI to residential RS and PI located in the 62 to 6500 blocks of Woodland Drive, subject to staff's recommendations.
Is there a second? Commissioner Mudgett?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of Z-03-19-05. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. That would leave us next with site plan. Commissioner Peterson?
I move we approve SP-11-19-05 per staff recommendations for site plan of the Woodland and Shawnee Mission Parkway area. Do I have to also mention the pre-plat?
No, we do them one at a
I
time.
thought so.
Is there a second? Commissioner Wise?
I'll second the motion.
There's a motion and a second for approval of SP 111905 for site plan for Schier Products at corner of Shawnee Mission Parkway and Woodland Drive. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. That leaves us with the pre-plat. Commissioner Braley?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion for approval of pre-plat -06-19-05 preliminary plat of Schier Products, an industrial and residential subdivision located in the 6200 to 6500 blocks of Woodland Drive, subject to staff's conditions.
Is there a second? Commissioner Les Smith?
Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of pre-plat 06-1905 Schier Products, industrial office development at the corner of Shawnee Mission Parkway and Woodland Drive. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Moving on, next we have the text amendment to the zoning ordinance, liquor-related and non-alcohol beverage land use. Stephanie?
Yes. Let me switch PowerPoints here really quickly. Okay, and since I'm standing over here, I guess I can just present from over here. So that works fine. Yep. So I'm going to go through this presentation again. I know the Planning Commission heard it on actually April Fool's Day and also the day that Kansas allowed strong beer in our liquor stores. So I'm going to go over this again just for the audience. And I'm glad that we started the conversation on the first because this is sort of morphed as we've been going to a more comprehensive amendment that now actually includes not only the liquor-related regulations, but also some non-alcoholic beverage-related land uses. So you'll see some of those changes in here. So the liquor-related land uses that we're talking about in this text amendment are microbreweries, microdistilleries, and then the full-size breweries and distilleries, boutique alcohol, which can be like a wine bar, I guess a small place where you can taste wine or whiskeys or scotches or whatever they may have, and also wineries and vineyards, because our current code doesn't really talk about any of these land uses and how to regulate them within the city of Shawnee. We also want to talk about some non-alcoholic beverage land uses, such as craft sodas and cider mills, such as Lewisburg Cider Mill, which is usually a staple for everyone's fall around here. Wouldn't we love to have that in Shawnee, though? And in order to be able to get something like that in Shawnee, we need to know how to approach it from a zoning standpoint, too. With craft soda, I know one of our new breweries, Cervase, actually does not only brewing of beers, but they have specialty sodas that they do as well. And those draw similar crowds sometimes. Obviously, if you've ever been to the cider mill or something like that, you've seen parking can be an issue. So we need to think about those types of things when it comes to zoning. Our existing microbreweries are Cervase and Transport. They're both here in downtown Shawnee on Johnson Drive. Transport's right across the street, and Cervase is kind of across the street from the hardware store, right past the intersection here of Neiman. As you can see here, they're about 30-70 or so on retail and manufacturing space, with a total of 2,700 to 3,000 square feet for those spaces, and they produce around 400 barrels a year of beers. They do have a 70-30 threshold on alcohol sales versus food sales. That is actually a requirement by county, and you can see here, there we are in Johnson in the sort of medium pink color. Johnson County requires that 30% of those food sales be part of what they're doing for their business. So they can only sell 70% liquor and 30% has to be food. There are some counties that don't require that, such as Douglas and Wyandotte and Leavenworth, which are to the north of Johnson County. But you can see overall the majority of the state does have that 30% food requirement. So our current code just talks about distilling and blending liquors and microbrewery, and it's only permitted in our commercial highway, town square, and PI zoning districts, and it has a parking code of D2. There's really no other special conditions. It really doesn't talk about a micro distillery. It doesn't talk about distances. It doesn't talk about sizes of the actual establishment itself. So what we're proposing is to go into a little bit more detail here. And so you'll see we have categories that encompass microbrewery, microdistillery, and other boutique liquor establishments, more or less than 5,000 square feet. So basically, once you're a larger space, for the most part, you can become a special use rather than a permitted use. And brewery or distillery would be a larger scale. These terms are all defined, so it's very clear, and also they have to do with the type of license you get from the state. So the state is going to provide a lot of that determination for us, because you can't be opening a brewery if you have a license to be a microbrewery from the state. We also added specialty non-alcoholic beverage establishments, which will be permitted in CN, CH, TSQ, and PI. And also to our secondary table here, we added that same non-alcoholic beverage category to ag, and a winery or vineyard to ag as well. We also added in the special conditions that you can see for the microbreweries on the top half here and the microdistilleries. It shall not be within 200 feet of a church or school unless certain criteria are met. So this changed since the last meeting that we had. We talked about how to measure that, and we'll go into that here in a minute, but also some opportunities maybe for an exception from that 200 feet. So our parking requirements that we tagged in our table have to do with the number of employees. Kind of the parking requirement for like a microbrewery would be 1 space for each employee plus 1 space for each 2 persons based on the maximum design capacity. And for something like the larger winery type establishment, 1 space per 1,000 square feet of floor area, or 1 for each 2 employees. So like I said, we did define all of these terms, and we had to renumber a couple of the terms in here. So you'll see we had to cross out some and renumber them and put them back in order. So we're not changing the definition of buffer areas and Mid-America Regional Council and soil. We're just moving them in accordance with where they're numbered in our definitions. But we do have a term for brewery, boutique liquor establishment. We had to define core commercial area. Based on the state code, if we define core commercial area, then we have more allowance to how we regulate that 200-foot separation. So by defining it here as commercial neighborhood, commercial highway, and town square, we've said that those are districts that we consider that commercial area, and we're then able to basically define our separation requirements in that commercial area. We have a definition for a distillery, microbrewery, microdistillery, and then we're moving that definition for Mid-America Regional Council. Soil has to be moved also to make room for specialty non-alcoholic beverage establishments, and we have vineyard. And I know we didn't have the specialty non-alcoholic beverage establishment definition last time, so really quickly, just for the record, that means a business that sells specialty non-alcoholic beverages primarily for on-site consumption. They may be manufactured on-site as well. We also have the definition for winery, and we had to relocate the definition for required yard to go with that numbering. So as you know, the state liquor laws do define these as well, and so we're not getting into the weeds of the barrels because that may fluctuate, and then we'd have to update our ordinance to match what the state changes it to. So a lot of the time in our definitions, you'll see that it referenced being licensed as a microbrewery or microdistillery or brewery by the state. So we're leaving it up to the state to determine how many barrels, how many gallons, those types of things. So the state liquor laws currently require that microbreweries have 100 to a maximum of 60,000 barrels of beer, up to 100,000 gallons of cider, and they're not considered a retailer or a manufacturer. Microdistilleries are up to 50,000 gallons of spirits annually, and they're also not considered a retailer or manufacturer. A farm winery, as defined by the state, is up to 100,000 gallons of wine annually, and they manufacture wine from their own grapes or from grapes from another vineyard. A vineyard has 100 or more vines, and they may purchase wine at wholesale from any Kansas farm winery that was made from the vineyard's grapes. So there's kind of a relationship between a farm winery and a vineyard. So going into the separation requirement, this is something we talked about at our meeting on April 1st, where we discussed how to measure that, what to measure from, what to measure to, and the regulations are considering the location of one of these alcohol type uses in relation to churches and schools. So originally we thought front door to front door, and after our discussion with the Planning Commission at the last meeting, we decided a better measurement was wall to wall. And how we defined it here is measuring by a single straight line starting from the wall of the first tenant space, which would be the microbrewery in this instance, to the secondary tenant's wall, which would be a school, and ending at the secondary tenant's closest wall unless otherwise specifically mentioned by the city's regulations or mandated by the county or the state. So to further clarify, for establishments serving liquor, the boundary of the outdoor areas where the liquor is served shall be considered as a wall when measuring separation. So if they have an outdoor patio on the side next to the church or the school, we're going to count that patio as the closest wall rather than the actual wall of the building. And we did want to build in something for an exception from the requirement because we do know of some circumstances where maybe there's some existing tenant spaces, maybe there's some existing church tenants that may be in like a retail center where it's a little abnormal to see a church maybe in a retail space versus kind of on its own property in its own standalone building. So we wanted to run this by the Planning Commission about writing in an exception from the separation requirement. And we said if you submit a formal letter to the Community Development Department requesting the exception, you also need to accompany that with a letter of support from the church or school that you're close to within that 200 feet. And then that would be administratively reviewed for the impact on parking, hours of operation, and noise. So ultimately, staff could potentially be approving a waiver of that separation if all those conditions are met. So we wanted to run that by the Planning Commission and see if that's something that we could put in the code. It doesn't have to necessarily be all 200 feet, but we do want to be able to potentially look at this at a case-by-case basis. And just to go off of what I said earlier about the core commercial district, this is from the state liquor law. If there is this says here, any city by ordinance may allow a retailer, microbrewery, microdistillery, or farm winery to be located within the core commercial district. And amendments which does not meet the distance requirements established by the subsection. So basically, if we're defining the core commercial district, we don't necessarily have to meet the state's 200-foot distance requirements. So going back to what I did earlier with the definition of core commercial district, since we've defined that, we don't have to meet those distance requirements necessarily. But if you look back at our use table, we did set our distance requirement at 200 feet by default without a waiver. So it's a little complicated, but we found some ways to make this work with our code without getting too specific into the weeds of some of the things that the state's going to be regulating and possibly fluctuating in the future. And if you have any questions, I can definitely try my best to explain any of the state liquor laws for you, but I'd like to talk through some of the changes we have and if you have any questions about where we're at.
Commissioner Peterson.
My question is in regard to the exception, and I like the fact that you were able to do that, Section C, but the last, don't have any problem with you being able to, staff being able to administratively review that. What happens in, say, that strip mall commercial where a church is perhaps renting space? And is there anything chicken before the egg, as if the microbrewery is already there, but the church rents space and it's at that 200 border? Do they get to usurp because they are, the pre-existing didn't occur? How are you doing that with rental situations like that?
So this could actually be handy for those types of scenarios because we would have the ability to take a look at them. The church is permitted there by right if the zoning's correct. So the church is allowed to go there if the brewery's already there. The brewery would then be essentially grandfathered because they met the separation requirement that was in place at the time that they started the business. Yeah, they would not. Correct. Yes.
Would that be as long as that liquor license was intact? So if you sold it, would the operation would change ownership and liquor license, we'd still allow them to be grandfathered in, correct?
I don't know if we thought quite that far with it, but I'd be happy to clarify that or adopt that as a policy as part of our review.
It would seem to me if it was a continuously functioning business, even if it changed ownership, if we didn't allow that, then a change of ownership after a church moved in could mean that we'd have to negate the liquor license. So it seems like we would have to do that, wouldn't we?
I'm sorry, I thought you meant with just saying that the liquor store existed if this exception would run out, if the liquor license ran out, not in relation to there being the church next to it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Probably.
But what we're saying here is, okay, say this owner of XYZ, which is related, is there before, does then that create a crack in the facade that something could be upset? And I realize you can't, X out every possibility, but.
I honestly think that's a state-regulated question. I know that, for instance, there was a liquor store in proximity to, that was there first, and a daycare came in, and there's no issue with that. So essentially, I think if you're there first, you're good to go. It's the way I understand it, but I believe it's regulated by the state.
Commissioner Beanhawk.
Yeah, seems to me that we would want to make a stipulation, and I don't believe the liquor licenses are under our control, but as far as zoning and our permitted businesses, that we would want to allow, if someone sold their business and it was the same type of business, we should allow that even if something else that was closer in proximity moved in the meantime. Otherwise, I think we're going to create a trap for somebody.
Mr. Chairman, I think it says right here that it addresses that in 41-710 C1, where it states that in that effect, and it says, in essence, if something moves in after the premises have been licensed, the premises shall be an eligible location for retail licensing, and I guess it depends what our definition of premises is. I would think that would be physical location, wouldn't it? So I think that says that right here.
And staff is comfortable that that's addressed in that context. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Les Smith, to be exact.
Got my one for the year. I shall retire now.
Is there any other questions or comments? If not, then at this point in time, we need to, I'm sorry? Yes, public hearing, yes. Does anybody from the public wish to comment on this matter? If so, please come forward and state your name and address and, oh, please. And if you'd write your name legibly, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
David Harris, 5730 Beverly Lane. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I am a commercial real estate portfolio manager by trade, and so monitoring trends within development markets across the country and locally is what I do professionally. And one of the things that I've been paying very close attention to lately is retail development, looking at shifting demographics, demand drivers within that industry, and the types of products that create for a sticky environment that build demand within core areas of development within communities. And across the board, I will tell you that I'm seeing very clear trends that these types of defined industries and businesses that are being outlined with the proposals are specifically the types of businesses that are a demand driver, both for development and for people living within the community. It adds to the vibrancy, it adds to the viability. And these types of industries oftentimes struggle to get off the ground because the regulatory environment can be a challenging one to navigate. And I will commend the staff and your commission on taking a proactive and very diligent approach in this matter, and that the added clarifications with regard to the specifically delineated types of industries that can now operate and the parameters within which they can operate makes it much easier for potential businesses to move into the Shawnee community, and I think would be a very significant benefit to future development, and would bring, tying it in with the earlier discussion with the desire for more restaurants. When you talk about makers, there's a lot of tie-in when you begin to bring in craft makers within a community, and you're starting to see the beginning stages of that here in Shawnee, and this would only help to further that in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
You're welcome.
And if anybody else would like to come forward and thank and congratulate us and thank us, we step right up. That's fine with us.
Legibility is not my strong suit, but I'll do my best. Is there another pen that works?
Oh, did that work? Maybe try this one.
That works.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Williamson, 13723 West 81st Terrace in Lenexa. I'm actually one of those said business owners. I'm actually a partial owner in Transport across the street. I also own Sandhills Brewing down in Mission that just opened about 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to just comment on a couple of things that actually David brought up and that you brought up throughout your discussion, which is as it pertains to more restaurants and more viable, particularly commercial neighborhoods. And I'll just share a couple of experiences from opening Sandhills, specifically in Mission, which is that we've been open 2 weeks. It's very small. We worked on it for 9 months. But a couple of things that were very difficult in starting it that a lot of your suggested changes actually address is, number one, where could we open? Because of a lot of the state requirements, not being within 200 feet of a school, not being within 200 feet of a church, being in a commercial zone district or a business district, this really limited our choices. And ultimately, it meant that we had to be in a downtown commercial district, which we liked. However, that becomes very difficult because of cost in a lot of more established areas. But when we're talking about an area like Shawnee and Mission and the surrounding areas that are really seeing a lot of redevelopment recently, one of the things that I personally looked for is walkability. How many people live within the immediate vicinity of where my business is going to be so that they can walk to my business? And what I can tell you is that it's worked. In fact, one of the most exciting parts of starting and contributing to even transport across the street is that the majority of our clientele are walking to us. So for the last 2 weeks in Mission, when I've been running Sandhills, the majority of my clientele are young families with kids that are in walking distance of me. And that's really, really cool. These changes specifically enable more of that because suddenly we've got areas within Shawnee and the surrounding areas, particularly small commercial hubs located next to neighborhoods that typically would not allow this kind of business and yet are ideal for that. Obviously there's always concerns with a liquor license and anything that involves liquor. You want to have people that are drinking responsibly. You don't want to have too much driving. And what a better way to do that than put it within walking distance of their homes. So not only does it improve safety, but it also helps revitalize those areas. I can say that just in my own experiences, we get a lot of local clientele. Yeah, we get people, the craft brewing world as a whole is really exploding nationwide and it's exploding in Kansas City for sure. So there's a quote unquote beer tourism going on, but the vast majority of my customers are local. Like literally local within walking distance. The number of people I've heard from in the last 2 weeks that said, yeah, I just live right down the block. I walked here. Was really, really cool to me. Particularly, I come from online businesses. I've done multiple online businesses over the last 10 years. And so starting something that's not only local, but also physical has been a little strange to me. But I think these regulations specifically, as they pertain to zoning, is really, really helpful. And I guess the other thing that I would say is, I think some of the staff mentioned the desire for more restaurants. This, again, just further enhances that ability to have more restaurants and other like-minded businesses in those small suburban areas that otherwise you previously just couldn't have. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else care to speak on the matter? If not, then this would close the public hearing. So we would be in commission discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Les Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Stephanie, great job. Did a lot of work on this, and it shows, and you did a lot of really good work on this. As far as the two gentlemen who spoke, and I have it on fairly good authority that the place in Mission is doing very, very well after only 2 weeks, as a matter of fact. I hope she hasn't spent a lot of time there, but I do have that on good authority. I mentioned just briefly to these two guys right here that it's really fun to just watch this whole industry explode right before our eyes. And it really is very, very fascinating. And I think you're seeing a lot of people who have a passion for something are now becoming these entrepreneurs and finding out what the rest of the world deals with. And it's just exciting. And you're exactly right. It brings that sense of place to an area. And I just have to commend you for doing it. It's exciting to watch it, and I just have to jump on board and say good job for our folks for bringing it forward in the way they did. And I really hope it does help because it's just pretty cool, quite honestly.
Thank you. Any other commission discussion? If not, I think what we need to propose is a motion to accept the changes on the zoning ordinance for liquor-related and non-alcoholic beverage land use. And it gets forwarded on then to the city council for adoption. Is that correct? For review. They can only review it. They can't vote on it? Oh, good. Any further discussion? If not, does someone wish to tackle that?
Sure.
Commissioner Wise.
I'll make a motion that we approve the text amendment to the zoning ordinance for liquor-related non-alcoholic beverage land uses and submit to council, city council for review per staff recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Willoughby.
I second the motion.
The motion is second to forward on to the city council the text amendments to the zoning ordinance for liquor-related and non-alcoholic beverage land use. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Next, we moved on to a discussion item on the 11200 Johnson Drive paint revision. Okay, that's Stephanie.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being patient. I know it's getting to be a little late here. We are now talking about a proposed paint revision for the property at 11200 Johnson Drive. If you're not familiar with the address, it was the former Casa Latin right across the street here. The applicant is looking to repaint the building to a charcoal, sort of dark gray color. And you can actually see that on the building currently. They started painting a little bit of the east side of the building toward the second floor. Staff noticed that that painting had started, and we asked them to stop work so that we could get a formal approval for the proposed changes. Going through this image here, you can see that they're looking to do some pretty drastic changes because the existing building is kind of like a tan, light green color. If you look at it closely, it has burgundy awnings. This is actually just the south elevation of the building, and you can kind of see the corner element there off to the right side of the building. And then there's a separate tenant in the portion of the building that's already painted that sort of charcoal color. There is some existing orange kind of colored tile at the base of the structure here, and then sort of an arced area with some tile inlay around that. They're proposing this type of color scheme, and I'll let the applicant talk more about any differences specific to what they're proposing. But overall, what they told us was this charcoal color overall, retaining the burgundy colored awnings after doing some, I believe, cleaning and clear coat to them to sort of vamp the color back up to its vibrant burgundy, and then some white trim paint around the windows. Staff's a little concerned with making the building that dark, and so we came up with some alternate Photoshopped ideas. This is one of them. This is staff recommendation A. It still would relate this tenant space to the darker color at the other tenant space to the left of this. This proposes sort of a navy or charcoal awning color rather than the existing burgundy, and then goes with more of a neutral colored paint. This one actually shows, if you can see here on the side, that this entry feature could potentially be painted a charcoal color, so to have that sort of accent and break up the neutral color and also delineate where the entry point is. So that's one option that we thought of. The other option, it's using the similar color palette, playing off sort of the dark and light contrast, but we thought maybe to sort of frame the top of the building, painting a strip toward the top in that charcoal color. And then you'll see down here the tile also is sort of a navy or a charcoal gray, maybe a little bit lighter gray, just to play into those color schemes that you see on the existing building over here. So by all means, this is not necessarily what we're recommending, that they must do this or they must do that. These are just some options that we thought maybe play better to the character of the building, the character of our downtown. And overall, staff is not supportive of a large, dark building in this particular area just because it's out of character for this type of building, for this architecture. If the applicant was willing to do maybe a more modernized improvement to the building, where maybe we're looking at different awnings or more glazing, or maybe a new storefront canopy or something, where we kind of modernize the architecture along with it, then that dark color scheme might be more appropriate. It's a pretty modern color to go with a dark charcoal or a dark gray or dark navy. So we just wanted to make sure to retain sort of the architecture of the building with a color palette that matches the current architecture, if they're not looking to make any drastic changes to the building itself. And that's all I really have for you. If you have any
Thank you. Then
questions,
I
can answer
would
them.
assume the applicant is here so we can ask them. If the applicant is here, as you come forward and state your name and address.
My name is Greg Britz. I live in Western Shawnee at 25620 West 67th Street. And I'm co-owner of this building and the adjacent building, the Top Shop. So we recently, Casa Latina went out of business, and the subsequent tenant, Me Casa Latina, also went out of business. So we found a business owner here in Shawnee that has two other businesses that wants to turn this into a piano bar. And we wholeheartedly agree. We think that would really enhance the downtown area as well. We've talked to other business leaders in the community that have businesses down here, and they agree with us as well. So we started talking about, well, what should the color be? And we thought, well, it's a piano theme, so we wanted to go with a darker kind of a charcoal and white, like piano keys and the color of piano, and tie in with the existing building that's just to the left there on the screen. So we decided, well, how does that fit with the downtown area? So we started looking at some buildings, and we found 4 or 5, and you're very familiar with the visitor center and the town hall. It's a dark gray. We've also found some that are,
Greg, where was that?
that's the visitor center and the town hall, just 2 blocks down on Johnson Drive.
Oh, okay.
Visitor Center for Old Shawnee.
Old Shawnee Town.
Oh,
yeah.
Old Shawnee Town.
Yeah.
Right.
For Town Hall.
Okay.
Put your
Right,
pictures on
got
the
it.
overhead
Thank you, Bill.
on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Give it just a second.
So that's one. So we thought, well, it's a nice gray. Then we went further down the street over here at First Watch, and there's a lot of gray there. So we're thinking this fits into the color scheme that the city has been approving. So we started looking at a few more. This one's on 60th and Barton, which is just down the street from us. And then there are others as far as, BMW down here on I-35 and Miriam. So we're thinking, okay, it's going to fit in this piano scheme that we're thinking of as well. And that's when we started talking with Stephanie about, well, what's the appropriate color for downtown? So that's how we came up with our color palette, to try and have some contrast between buildings, yet tie these colors together that exist today in some of the other businesses. So that's really where we are. We tried to follow ordinances. We found an ordinance, I believe it's 15.32 or 52.100. It talks about exterior buildings, but doesn't mention colors. And we understand we're trying to tie these colors together and not have a pink building over here and a red one over here. So what we really tried to do is follow the different color schemes that are here in Shawnee now, and there's a lot of dark gray and some black, even Sweet Teas across the street just has some black. So, and talking with the other business owners, they feel that contrast is good too. We don't want all beige, we don't want all black, we don't want all yellow. So we're hoping that this piano theme that we're trying to build here with this new business would lend itself to this color pattern, and that's why we chose it. So we'd like to consider that for approval, if we could.
Thank you, Greg. Does the commission have any questions for the applicant or staff? Commissioner Wise?
A couple of, and maybe not as much questions as concerns, but one of the challenges will be in that arc, that is a fairly big area. And I understand leaving that a Spanish tile color probably doesn't work with a lot of color schemes. The challenge is finishing tile can be difficult, and if you just paint it, that can be a maintenance issue.
no,
So
we
that's
don't.
just a concern, but it is an area where there could be some accent, light or dark, either way. My other challenge would be that on the Part B or the option B, trying to get a line straight and looking even on EFS is going to be difficult. So to me, we figure out what a color is. And I would almost be of the impression that, I feel like the lighter color is better, even though I'm not sure how we ended up with the one segment of gray over there. But even taking off the awnings on just the lower windows might help quite a bit too. Just opening up that glass, getting some of that dark off of there. Those are my thoughts just about trying to, keep it a little lighter, but just being careful too about how you finish things, that it doesn't become a real long-term maintenance issue for you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Les Smith.
First things first, I don't necessarily like trying to convince someone to spend a bunch of money that they don't need to spend without incentivizing them to do so. So as far as asking them to change awnings, to me, that's something that's really not practical. Secondly, I gotta be honest with you, I didn't like it when I first looked at it. And I do have a building, the exterior is like that, and I have I have a border across the top, and actually it looks pretty doggone straight. My thinking is that, if you're really married to this color, that if you stripe the top of it maybe 18 inches or something like that, which would shrink the building, give the appearance of shrinking the building. I think part of it is it just looks awfully dark because it's, on one hand, it's massive, on the other hand, it's chopped up. But, that shrink it, you get some more white on there, and I'd still go there, play the piano.
Yeah, we tried to come up with a rendering. We just didn't have the software to do it, but we put a smaller stripe across the top, either a silver or white. We're open to those kind of things, so. We'd like to stay with the white and the gray from that piano theme that we're trying to create and tie in with some of the other buildings down here too, so.
Commissioner Peterson.
I have a I drive down here frequently, and I remember looking up and going, wow, when did that turn black? That one at the end of the deal, and I was like, that goes. But I'm not sure. So, do we have a timeline of when that 1/3 or whatever of the building went black? I just remember. 14 months ago? Because I remember when it happened, and then after that, and I was like, but I definitely noticed it.
If I can answer this question, I'm Bill Hanson.
Why don't you come forward and state your name and address, Bill?
I'm just stopping in for a minute. I'm Bill Owens, and I live at 6700 Nolan in Shawnee. When we painted that, number one, we were not aware of an ordinance that required us to ask permission to paint. I searched all the ordinances. I found 1552-100, and it says painting, you have to paint if you're peeling or chipping, or you have to repair holes, but there was nothing that said color. There was no guidelines for it said color. There is a pamphlet that does not quote an ordinance that was passed out by the Downtown Businessmen's Association and the city that said they encourage earth tones. I sell granite for a living, and I've got a lot of colors of black and gray, and it's all come from God's earth. So it was an earth tone. So that's how it got to be dark gray. And that was 14 months ago.
That was
Okay. Then
because
you.
I was like, I remember it when it happened on my timeline.
In your question about the straight line, the tenant has suggested if you want that, and I like that, you look at old Shawnee Bank across the street, and it's black with aluminum, and that's the color of it, except for the part where there's none, and you see the concrete block wall, but that's a different story. Oh, he suggested that we put a 12-inch band around the top of the building in aluminum or stainless or a metal. Oh, and that would certainly give us the street light, it'd help with the modern look. And his signage is going to be on the corner where it's at a 45-degree angle. And it's looking at signage on that plus correct me, is it a blade sign? Is that the right word? And suggested that to be in metal as well, to add to it. So that would do a lot to answer the question on the lower awnings. Below that, those two bay windows, there used to be a 3-car garage. And when it was originally built, there was 3 garage doors there. There was not a second floor. For many years, it was a 3-car garage. The people running the garage added the second floor to put their family in. It was an apartment. The supplement store was then built on to be a office for that. And the upstairs was part of the apartment. The ice cream store was a drive-through car wash. Drive in the front, drive out the back. So it's all changed over time. That's got an eyebrow underneath that awning over those bay windows. So there'd be something there, whether it be the awning or that. The awning is trying to cover up the eyebrow and try to give it just a little bit more of a modern look. And I picked out the color for that. Didn't ask again, but I picked out the color for those awnings 8 years ago.
A couple comments from me here is first of all, Mr. Britz, one thing you've brought up is you've brought up some colors that are similar to what you're using, but they're in completely different areas of the city, okay?
It's right down Johnson Drive.
Right, but that's a different, it's not in what is the downtown Shawnee partnership and stuff. And the other thing is I remember spending many hours like we just did on this other revision to our planning guides for alcohol and that, and hearing what the downtown partnership people wanted for colors, and then going back and forth. And we spent many hours doing this. And I assume since you own the building there that you were a member of the downtown partnership or the downtown business association?
When it was still in force.
I'm sorry?
When it was still in force, they dissolved.
He's talking about the Downtown Business Association.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is dissolved. We met with some of them the last few days and asked their opinions.
Right, and my problem with it is a very, very dark color. It's not what we wanted for this area, and yet we spent hours. We literally spent hours discussing this and going back and forth to find it out, and agreed with the downtown businesses that this is what they wanted to, and it just doesn't match in. I'm not as concerned about the color of your awnings, although I do know we have colors for awnings that's in part of that, for what can be. But a color that's so far off from it, and yet it's in this downtown area where we wanted to be strictly very cognizant of colors that were going to look nice and natural on all these buildings down here, says it's very hard for me to say, well, it's only a dark gray. So, and that's my opinion, and other commissioners will see
Oh, I'm sure.
what they think,
Well,
but
that's why we're here.
it seems to me, and you know what? We occasionally have it when people mess up and don't realize that these are the things they need to go through to get something done. So I certainly don't hold that against it, but the color just does not work for me. It's way too dark.
And your suggestions are?
No,
Question for staff. So do we have color guidelines for downtown?
Color selection. Street color schemes, street. Have a personal preference. Colors that complement the surrounding. Work codes for popular in the time. As defined in pedestrians. Dark reds, pale yellows. Color, trim, texture. To answer your question, yes, there are very specific. These were adopted in 2003.
Well, just first.
Commissioner Peterson.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Mr.
I was
Britt?
just going to suggest.
Please.
When we looked at these colors, we thought, well, we'll also look at some of the other communities. And we're seeing them in Lenexa and Overland Park and Miriam. So we see trends in this color scheme. There was a real estate individual in here earlier. I wish he was still here. But we're seeing trends move in this direction from 2003 to today. That's a long time. So we see this pattern developing. No matter where we go, we start to see these darker colors. And I know what you're saying. You don't want it black or all dark. And we're trying to enhance it as best we can to stay within our theme. So,
Commissioner Peterson.
The one thing that, twofold that I was going to talk about a little bit earlier is that I know you have a piano bubble. I'm excited about that. But being a property owner, tenants coming up. And what if the next tenant, hopefully, I'm not saying you can have a piano bar, but then what happens if they're like, ugh, it's so dark, and I mean, maybe it must be a flower shop, I don't know. I just, we can't be, you know, whatever, property rights as well. But the thing is I think this is one of the discussions we were talking about when we were talking about the guidelines for the new and now projects and things like that. I like that color of gray. I don't think that's what we're going for downtown. I know that my color building at the end of the block. I wouldn't put it in your house that color. It is what it is, and that's what I do, so that's my color. And it's not trying to be this. It's just a little too big for me. It very much becomes a focal point. It is. I just struggle with that because, okay, does that push the line even further? What's the next person? That's what I say. But I wish every.
Commissioner Beanhoff.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my struggle with this is, you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, many hours were spent on the design guidelines and put in place and approved. And the concern I have is if we make an exception, then we're setting a precedence. And, you know, say I wanted to go build something down the street and I just drove around to different areas and came up with what I thought the trends were going to be and said, well, it's okay because I see the trend in the area. I think the point from my perspective is the downtown council has guidelines in place for a reason, and I think we need to respect that.
Any further questions?
Is there a period of when you
Mr.
upgrade?
Briggs, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Is there a period when you upgrade these guidelines? Like I said, 2003, that's quite a jump from today.
I would answer that with, yes, we do.
Okay.
But generally when we do, then you're talking roughly at least 90 days. Even if we started on them now, we'd be at least 90 days before we get through all of the conversations, all the public hearings, all the essentially changes and rewrites like we were doing tonight and making sure we're all on the same page. And then it goes on to city council. So it does happen when we see a need for it or when it's pointed out to us that we might be wrong. Doug, help me out here.
And generally, too, to be honest with you, we were trying to get these guys an answer quickly. Normally, when a major building, which this is a nice building, a major building in downtown goes through an interchanging color scheme like this, we would have presented it to the partnership to get their opinion. To be honest with you, we did that with other buildings in downtown. Even, I think, Mike Hartman's awning, when he put that on, we took that forward to them first. And then they honestly, even though it's not a binding recommendation, generally would give you guys as a body a recommendation. But they're looking for good weather. They had started, and so we literally met with them on site and said, look, we'll try to get you as best we can on the very next agenda so that we can get you an answer. I have not talked except for one person on the partnership about this, and I just happened to run into him at the open house. Stephanie did her magic in Photoshop, and that's why we even have a presentation today. So I guess normally this process would take a little longer, even just to get an approval of a color. But we were wanting to kind of get you in it here as quickly as we could.
Then I guess at this point in time, does it, commission, I guess we're going into commission discussion now. And my thought would be is we can say, we don't want this color. It needs to come closer to out of the neutral colors that were in our design guidelines. Or I guess we could vote to okay the color as an exception. Or maybe even if Mr. Britz would consider this is maybe if you'd like to go to the downtown businesses and see what they have to say so that we would table this.
We would.
But if we table this, we won't see it again will we see it at the next meeting, Doug? It's actually 30 days.
The partnership only meets every third Thursday of every other month. We just had a meeting, so it would be.
So you'd be into mid-June at least.
We talked to Mike this morning, and he's willing to get together.
That's who I.
So if that's the case, then there could be no further painting going on, and if you want to talk to them.
Yep.
Now, if they were to give us a guideline, that doesn't necessarily mean we would agree with them. You understand that, so.
Yeah. And, we talked with Mike about it, and, having the business community involved in this is an important piece of that. So it'd be good to have that discussion with them.
Then now we're back, Commissioner Budget.
Can I ask a quick question of the applicant?
Please.
Greg, are you guys working with any kind of designer, professional designer at all, just to help you? No. Because we're not professional designers, and that's not our function here. And I struggle when we have to try and pick out things like that, but sadly, I understand why Doug's bringing that to our attention. But I would encourage you to have somebody look at it economically who does that for a living. I think with a couple little changes, I think it would go a lot smoother.
Okay. If I could say one thing, the whole color is the desire of the tenant that's going to spend all the money in there.
Got it.
So we're here to help him is all.
Sure.
So as far as if the next tenant doesn't like it, $2,000, the building can be pink.
Right.
It can be purple. It can have polka dots. It can be any color is what I'm
don't say
saying.
that. Don't
It's
say
not a big expense to paint a building. So
I mean, I'm not opposed to the way it is at all. If I understand the tenant wants to make it his, probably.
wants to make it his.
And I get
He feels
it.
it goes with this theme.
And gray, of course, is the new beige. So, I am not a
I
professional
don't know if
designer. Did I say
you are
that?
fond of gray.
I just happen to
I'm very
live with
fond
one.
of it. I
so.
used to be fond of dark brown, but it's changed.
Right. Right.
Now I wear a hat.
Right.
So at this point in time, we're back in commission discussion. And how's the commissioners feel up here? Commissioner Wise?
Well, what I'm hearing is we don't have an agreement, and I'm wondering if what we need to do is table it and allow further discussion with staff and/or the downtown partnership business owners, give them at least a couple of weeks to see if something can be pulled together. I don't know, Doug, if that makes sense, but.
I was just asking, I think, unless I'm misspeaking, you guys want an answer, yes or no? Yes.
If they would like an answer tonight, then we can vote on whether this color will work or not. And if not, then if it's to be voted down, then they would have to work with staff on figuring a color that met the color schemes. Is that correct?
Basically, it would stay the color it is today.
Oh,
It's not been painted yet. These are.
Yeah, but both your options,
Those are just suggestions, not requirements.
We don't have any interest at all in replacing the awnings. There's $15,000 to $18,000 there, and it's not a.
at this point in time, then it's simple matter of yes or no on whether the color they're proposing fits the scheme. So if someone would like to make a motion that said this fits our scheme, this doesn't, yea or for it, against it, deny it, or approve it. Whoever wants to make that motion. Or we can be in commission discussion for a while. And I will say this, I've spent too many years up here and spent too many hours on a lot of these things to say, hey, this is what the community wants. We go through it. And then if we say, heck, he's a good guy, because Bill Owens is a good guy and I don't know the other guy. So that's not the point. The point is if we go through all this and then we set it aside, then we're really not doing what the hell we're supposed to be doing. Commissioner Peterson.
The one thing I'm going to say. Everything is black and white. This is allowed.
Commissioner Wise.
All right. I'll make a motion on the piano bar facade revision that we not approve the dark gray color scheme presented.
Is there a second? Commissioner John Smith. Seconds the motion. Okay. Very fine. There's a motion and a second to deny this color. Is there any further discussion? Okay, since it's a vote for denial, correct? Then voting yes is for denial, and voting nay is voting against the motion. Is that correct? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. We deny the request for that particular color. We don't need to do anything else on that. Is that correct, Doug? So we're moving on now to discussion of Bellmont Promenade facade revision.
I'm going to be pretty brief because the architect and the applicant are here and they can probably tell you about their design ideas way better than I can. I can tell you that the commercial portion of Bellmont Promenade, the north side, you guys looked at back in July of 2018 and approved elevations for both the front and the back of that building. What has happened since then, they are getting close, if not inked, on a lot of the tenants who are going to occupy those spaces. And part of that involves some shuffling of some of the boxes, which happens, honestly. And so what that did is it provided some different relief lines on the back of the building. We included the revised front elevation compared to the elevation that was approved back in 2018. And except for some changing of locations, the color and materials essentially stay the same. A person probably driving down 66 would not know that we were even bringing that forward, that elevation back to you, because it's essentially the same. It just moved things around a little bit. But in doing that too with those relief areas, and now that they're getting in earnest the finished floors of those structures set, we always knew it was going to set below the Parkway, but we're finding out now that it's going to set significantly below the Parkway on the back side, which is a good thing because you don't want to see the loading docks and the trash enclosures and all of those things. So that was done for purpose. And so what they've done in terms of a request of us, we said we would bring it to you, see if it made sense, was altered some of the masonry at the bottom of those structures, and they're proposing some more synthetic type materials. And you probably are familiar with those because we went into them in detail when we started looking at the use of EIFS in lieu of synthetic stucco, or cementitious stucco. And so they have building examples, they have site sections, they have all kinds of things that they can share with you. Again, 2018 rendering versus the proposed, you can see the rear of those structures are slightly different. But at the same time, the concern with pilasters, building relief, texture relief, those kind of things, essentially all say the same. And then, again, the front elevation that was approved in 18 versus the proposed, you can see some of those elements moving around because of repositioning. In my opinion, the front elevation, I like the architecture of it better. It doesn't seem as busy to me, but again, that's subjective. But it would meet our criteria either way. Here is a site section from Shawnee Mission Parkway. The reason that they're requesting the material change is because, as you can see, that's simulating a car at the established elevation on Shawnee Mission Parkway, setting essentially 4 feet above the pavement, which was where the seat of a car would set. That's essentially what you're going to see of the top of that building from the back, from the east, west, and north side. And then they actually have another section in there that shows the effect of landscaping as well. I think our bigger concern versus the materials is making sure that we do a good job screening the rooftop equipment and those sort of things, because that building is going to be almost at eye level. And so we've talked with them about that, and once they begin refining their HVAC plans and their mechanical and electrical plans, that will that was a condition of approval that you placed on 2018, that they would work with staff. We even have a condition that if we get the structures built and we're still not happy with it, we have the right to go back and require additional screening. So that was a bigger concern then, and it probably still is today. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to the applicant, let them describe to you the design stance. In the packet, there's all kinds of material about the systems that they're proposing. And I think, to the naked eye, driving down the Parkway on that north elevation, a person would not know that they had basically changed things out. So I'll stop there and let them go on.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Lenahan. I'm from Yeager Architecture, 7780 West 119th Street in Overland Park. And we're representing Legacy Development here this evening to go over these minor changes that we're making in the building. And this is stemming in large measure from the fact that the tenant lease plan has settled down now. This is the arrangement of tenants that the tenants have collectively agreed to their positions on and are signing leases on. And so that resulted in, as Doug mentioned, the reshuffling of the facade elements on the front to match, or the front of the building to match those. But that also resulted in some differences in the north facade compared to what was presented to you a year ago, primarily in that a year ago there was essentially one kind of recess in the north facade of the building that was for the truck dock and service areas for the smaller tenants. The way the tenants now lay out, that's kind of been broken into two such areas. So you get more in and out relief on the facade of that north facade of that building. And that really led us to really have to take a little closer look at the design of that facade so that the architectural embellishments that were included on that facade made sense with those in and out projections. So the west end of that north facade of the building remains essentially unchanged from what was presented previously. That's the back side of the two large box tenants there. The east end, north end of the facade, which is the end of the kind of small shops that face east there, that's essentially unchanged. It's those 3-4 tenants in the center that we've changed a little bit, simplifying the pilaster applications a bit because those facades are going in and out, maintaining emphasis on the portions of the building that are closest to Shawnee Mission Parkway, and letting the facades that are further back, they're about 100 feet further back in some cases, to be a little more simplified so that those front facades maintain the presence that the visibility from Shawnee Mission Parkway requires. So there was that kind of overall compositional adjustment to the north facade. There's a couple other things we wanted to do as well. With these kind of smaller service areas in back, we think that there's really going to be obviously a little bit more maneuvering issues with trucks there. The previously approved design included a full-depth masonry veneer wainscot the entire length of that north facade to a height of about 4 feet from the ground. And with this additional maneuvering requirement for these smaller service courts in there, we really are concerned that that kind of an application of a kind of a higher dollar finished material like brick is going to be subject to some potential damage. Full depth masonry veneers, there's a gap between that and the substrate wall behind it with wire tiebacks between those. You can really kind of crunch those together. Because the bottom of this building is so invisible from Shawnee Mission Parkway, we think it really makes more sense not to do that wainscot along the full length of the building, give ourselves a finish applied as with the rest of the facade to the precast concrete panels that the facades will be built out of, and really make for a good solid finished material at that low portion of the building. And so so we're proposing to remove that full depth brick wainscot, go ahead and finish that with the same finished materials that we're using across the rest of that facade. The previously approved plan used cementitious stucco coating over the precast panels. We are proposing now to use instead a architectural textured acrylic coating instead. We do have samples of that. Chaz, you can grab that. We have the previously approved finished board, and we have samples of the alternate material. It looks identical, same texture. We can get the same colors. It's just a different chemical composition, essentially. For a precast substrate, this is what most of the precast buildings that you're seeing going up, particularly out south in Gardner, are using for finished materials. It simply gives a better bond than old-fashioned cementitious stucco does, and has a little bit better ability to withstand shrinkage and expansion and contraction than cementitious stucco does. So the pieces that are on the board here were representative of the original cementitious stucco. This is the alternate material. I think you can see it looks essentially identical. And again, we can match textures, match colors to what we had previously approved, and that's not a problem. The final then item that we wanted to do was on the pilasters themselves on the north side of the building, was to kind of maintain the same application of system across the whole facade so that we had something that was easily buildable by the trades, was a consistent material that would work against that precast concrete work from a technical point of view, but we knew we wanted to maintain some of those brick pilaster looks. So they are now producing these architectural textured coatings with a brick pattern finish, which is the sample that you see here. We included in the packet some examples of some buildings around town that have recently been finished with that, most notably the Courtyard downtown Kansas City, Missouri, where all of the brick above the second floor, I believe, of that building is this material. And because that surface is 130 feet away from Shawnee Mission Parkway, and that's the facade that's the frontage that it's facing, would like to use that material instead of using a real brick on those pilasters because, again, more consistent with the the system application of finishes on that facade, and because it's so far away from the public at that point, there's really no disadvantage to using it as opposed to a real brick. And it certainly would make the construction application more contiguous and more unified and would perform better in the long term. So those are the changes that we would like to make on the facade. Again, the overall appearance of the building, color schemes, texture, essentially the same as they were before, rearranged a bit to accommodate the final tenant layout. And I think kind of with this next step, we're very close to getting going with the final engineering and getting this thing under construction. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Commissioner Wise, you have questions?
I have a few. First of all, so the changes you're proposing are only on the north elevation and
The
part
north
of the
elevation and the west elevation,
North
where
and the west.
where it also faces Shawnee Mission Parkway, there's a service road back there, so.
Okay, and so the stucco coating you're talking about, I'll start with that one first. And you say that's applied directly to the precast, it's not on a rigid insulation?
Correct.
Okay. How is that repaired if they damage that?
It's just a retrowel on the surface.
Retrowel on the surface? Okay.
Blend it right in.
Because that does eliminate one of the concerns with synthetic being on rigid insulation, because that's where we tend to have the quality problems. I will say.
We were aware of that. That was actually a concern.
Mhm. Yeah, if they.
Yeah, no potential for that in this building because we'll be on the hard surface here, yeah.
Okay. And then my concern with the brick pattern like that, I know they also do a true thin set, a very thin set, but an actual brick. I've seen that on, I believe it's a hotel in downtown, and it's already cracking. It has not held up well, but I don't know how it's installed, and I don't, because it's probably a different substrate.
I'm sure, yeah, they did a gypsum board substrate on the backside.
But unfortunately, it's like you can see panels that don't align. And so part of it is an installation concern, and that's my challenge with that, is that from a distance, it's probably fine. Durability, it might be okay. The key is getting the backup correct so that we don't have that issue that's down there. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of that material, but I also understand you're dealing with a lot of quantity. But we want something that's going to look nice for a long period of time too. So, but I think the acrylic on the precast probably is not an issue. As long as you've got that good backup, I'm not as concerned about
I
that.
honestly had more trouble with cementitious stucco doing shrinkage cracking and things like that when it's been applied than in this material. I think will be a lot more forgiving in that respect. And you know, we have nice large surface substrates to apply this material to that aren't going to be broken up into sections like that hotel building was. So I think we'll get a much more satisfactory application of it on this one.
Commissioner Beanoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I am also concerned to make sure that we have a good-looking building out there for many years to come and into the future. And it's not just driving by on Shawnee Mission Parkway, but as you approach it and shop there, want to at least space there, make sure it looks good. And could you, I know you've touched on it a little bit, but speak to the differences in what we approved versus what you're proposing now from both a cost and durability perspective?
I can't really speak to the cost perspective. I'm not a contractor. I don't know what the cost considerations are on those in the current market. We do think that we actually will, with this material change on the north and west facades, given our precast concrete substrate backup to these finishes, this will be a better application than would have been a full-depth brick veneer. The full-depth brick veneer stands on its own. There's an air gap behind it to the backing material with brick ties that will compress if they're impacted. And in our situation with this material, it's on the precast. So if something were to knock against it, that's it. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to crush in or anything. And the material, the finished material, can be repainted, retroweled, re-smoothed out very easily. So we think from a maintenance perspective and an upkeep perspective, it'll be a much better application of material than to use full depth brick back in this service area. On the front of the building where the public is, where they approach the building, that's where we want to use the real materials that people can touch and feel and know that they have a quality finish in front of them as part of their experience of going to shop at these tenants in the parts of the building where you're down below Shawnee Mission Parkway by 12 to 14 feet and more than adequately screened by landscaping and truck traffic back there and screen walls for the truck docks. It just didn't make sense as the final layout landed to use those kind of materials.
Thank you.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Peterson.
I know that, I believe it was several years ago, we had a presentation on a new approved material, and it was an EFS. And that we had several buildings around the city that had issues with it, and 90% of it was a new product. Installers didn't always know what was going on, and so the new product that we approved, we stipulated certified installers along those lines. The product is typically not defective in this, it's how is it applied. Is there any way, what plans and specs that are going out to bid when this thing gets said and done, are there certified installers that would ensure that this was a good deal? Because, yeah, trowel is easy maintenance. It's not high up on the priority list.
We certainly, in our specifications, would require that the installers be manufacturer approved to begin with and follow the manufacturer's written instructions for the installation of the product. And we can.
Yeah, but who's going to ensure
We can police that and enforce that as the architect.
Okay.
So, and that will appear in the project manual that gets submitted as part of the plan review as well. So that can also be policed through the plan review process to make sure that those requirements are in there.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Commissioner Braley?
Yeah, just to follow up on Steve, the only concern when Steve mentioned it kind of caught my attention was just kind of the alignment of that brick pattern. And I don't know, I mean, what the specific application is and how that's going to work. But again, from the installer standpoint, if you as the architect are going to be the enforcer of that installation, it would help me to know what would be your tolerance of any kind of misalignment in the grout line as it moves across the facade, and what recourse do you have? How does that sort of play out? So let's first talk about what's your tolerance.
Yeah. So we for brick, we usually have a real brick. There's usually a tolerance of something like an 1/8 inch and 10 feet or something like that. That a joint has to remain level and that head joints have to align with, and that would be a loose tolerance for this product because it does use a pre-manufactured stencil essentially to create the pattern. So on this, we would really require pretty much absolute alignment of all those joints. And we kind of benefit on this building because we're not on the north side, on the places where we're proposing to use this material, we're not going to have large fields of the material that cover 30, 40 feet of the length of a facade. It's going to be short sections with clearly defined lines that will, I think, be really reasonable for an installer to do with great care and with attention to detail on how all those things line up. So that is certainly, again, easy for us to police and make sure that if we see that stuff going in and there's any waiver, and that won't be acceptable to us.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mudgett, did you have something to add?
Yeah. Patrick, how is the brick facade fastened? What's the fastener that goes to the cement?
This is directly applied to the cement, to the precast panel. It's literally troweled right on.
So it's
it
troweled.
bonds to the concrete.
So there is no gap between that at all. So water penetration, that kind of stuff, we don't worry about.
It's a unitary facade. It's a barrier material. So yeah, there's no water getting into it. So.
And all the real brick is still going on the front of the facility, correct?
Correct.
And none of that's
traditional construction in that respect, yeah.
Right. So none of this is going to be within, what'd you say, 12 or 14 feet away or more from anybody?
I mean, the reality is, I mean, from a public perspective, it's 130 feet away from the public at Shawnee Mission Parkway. So we're 20 feet from it right now, and the room is 45, 50 feet deep here. Right. So that kind of gives you an idea of distances there. Again, we want to make sure that what the public is in contact with is the real deal, and we want to, we had concerns about using that type of material in this back service area, and as we're getting into the to the engineering of this, and as we've really learned how the grades are going to work out there, it just did make sense to use full-depth brick back there with the potential hazards it was subject to, and given the proximity to the public there, I thought we feel like we would have a better long-term solution with this type of material on this substrate of a building. So.
Well, thanks for sticking around till 10 o'clock for that.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Wise.
Quick question. So is the masonry you've got in that pattern, is that actually a 4-foot wainscot, or is that intended full height?
No, this is going to be used for the pilasters. We would not do the wainscot with this material because it's not going to be visible. There's really no point in doing that. We use we still, I think, are showing a dark colored band down there just to maintain the same color scheme. But we would use this at the architectural pilasters on the north facade where it's up and where people can see it.
Yeah, I was concerned because if you're running a wainscot, then how do you stop it, trim it, make it look like
right.
It's not a thin.
Yeah, we had a
applied-
capstone previously, and there's
so it doesn't look fake. Yeah, that's
just be a line of tape.
that was my
otherwise.
concern. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? If not, then we would be in commission discussion.
Thank you.
Oops, did I miss somebody's hand? Oh, excuse me. Then we'd be in commission discussion. I'm certainly glad Commissioner Wise asked those questions because his expertise on this is incredibly good compared to my almost non-existent knowledge of this. So Commissioner Wise, you feel comfortable with this?
I feel better now that it's direct applied. We're not dealing with a drainage system. I agree in the fact that it's precast. Unfortunately, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to visualize this. I draft these sections all day and I'm trying to visualize it, but I've got a pretty good handle. And I feel like with the precast backup, what we're dealing with in the back, even though wouldn't be my first choice, and obviously on the front it's not, but I think on the north elevation, I'm comfortable that this should be an acceptable solution.
And I guess I would ask, it seems to me that at this point in time, staff has made their recommendations and they recommend that this would be a good change for us, so.
Acceptable.
It's acceptable. That means it's good, right?
It's not great, but it makes sense in this context.
Any other commission discussion?
One of
Commissioner
the things,
Peterson.
Sorry, that one of my concerns is that we keep hearing that it is X feet away from and elevations, and I just don't want us to completely ignore the back of the building because a significant part of the public was incredibly pointed about that. You're not going to see this thing absolutely from where you walk into the store at. You're going to have a lot more traffic. And I don't think you are completely doing that, but I have a feeling we're close.
To that point, honestly, on this building, the landscaping and that decorative fencing is going to be the most impactful thing, probably.
I agree, but I just
clustering
don't want to ignore that point.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the clustering of trees, and we're honestly working to refine that landscape plan for sightlines to signs, making sure that areas that have less relief will receive more tree plantings and those sort of things. They went above and beyond an original landscape plan that they exceeded our ordinance requirements. So I just wanted to make that point.
Right. It's just not backing up to a railroad.
Correct. Good point.
Any further discussion? If not, would someone care to put this into a motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Les Smith.
In light of the information provided by staff and the applicant and the testimony and expertise of Commissioner Wise, I move that the Planning Commission make the determination and approve the alternate building material request and revised elevation views for Bellmont Promenade.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Mudgett seconds the motion. The motion and a second to approve the changes for Bellmont Promenade. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you.
You're in the hot seat, by the way.
We're
You're in the hot
done.
seat.
Les. Does the staff have anything for the commissioners?
Don't you dare.
Please.
Thank you for remembering better than I did that there is something. Oh, sorry, that table moves. We have our open house coming up on the 14th. That is a Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, the 14th, we have the open house for the reimagined 75th Street project. That's going to be from 6 o'clock to 7:30. Come and go. So if you can't make it right at 6, that's fine if you want to stop in. That's for the revitalization effort for 75th Street between Quivira and Schweitzer. We're having that at Shawnee Elementary School. Shawnee, that one. Sorry, I knew I was going to butcher something tonight. We'll have it there at the elementary school from 6 to 7 next Tuesday, the 14th.
Stephanie, could you have someone in the office
We can
email us
email that out to you.
So
Yep.
we have it all down?
Yep, we just got
Date, time,
the-
et cetera?
Yep, we have the
Terrific.
flyers done today. We should have some social media out there and a website as well. So there will be an online survey that you can take. We'll also have printed copies of that at the open house as well. And you'll get to see all of our lovely faces there too. So should be a fun
Thank you.
Tuesday night.
Does the commission have anything for staff? Commissioner John Smith,
I move we adjourn this meeting.
is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Beanoff, was that your second?
That was Mr. Willoughby's.
Mr. Willoughby, that was your second. Thank you. We have a
Sir.
motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you all.
What? When we go over